Hi, in this video, video number 6, we will add a material to our object. We will talk about materials now. So, as you remember, we created this object, and here we have a group. If you remember, this group contains 3 objects: the outer body and the 2 shells. I will go to group and open this group. I will select this outer body for now and hide unselected. So first let's talk about material. What is a material? Lots of people confuse the word material with texture. Here I will show you real world projects, real world photos. I will click on this one. For example, here I have this floor, this wooden floor. First we see a texture, which is the color of the body, that derive from the type of wood. This is a property. This is the first property we see. Another property, we see that there is a certain degree here and here, a certain degree of reflection. So this is a second property. We also see that the reflection is blurry. So this is also a property. So we already saw 3 properties. Now this set of properties, in addition to other stuff, like for example you have some degree of bumpiness in this texture, is not totally polished, so this is also a property. So this set of properties joined together to create the look of this object, this floor. This collection of properties joined together are what we call a material. So a material is a collection of properties that an object has that give it its look. For example, here we have a chrome material. It has a neutral color. It has a very high degree of reflection. Now, why I say a neutral color? Because you don't see any color added to the reflection. So you see the environment around it reflected in it, and that's it. You don't see a color of its own added to this reflection. It's like a mirror. Here, for example, we have a glass material. It has also a neutral color. It has a certain degree of reflection, a certain degree of transparency, and this collection of properties makes the glass material. Now let's go back to Max. To create a material, you have to open the material editor window. You can click here or press the M on the keyboard. Now this is the material editor. This is the factory where you create your own materials. By default, maybe if this is the first time you open it, you probably see it like this: 6 materials. You can right click and choose 6 by 4. This is the maximum number of materials you can have, you can create. Now there is another mode here. I'm using now the compact material editor. You have this slate material editor. Here you can create more than 24. You can create as much as you like, as much materials as you like. This is for complex materials. Some people, they only use this one even for simple materials. I prefer to use this compact material editor for simple materials, and this is what we will use now. So first, by the way, I'm using a V-Ray rendering engine, so I'm using V-Ray material. Uh, in case Now the first step, I will add a texture. So in case you are using a different rendering engine, you probably have this standard material here. You can use this button here to load a texture, which is the same as this button here. If you are using a standard surface, if you are using Arnold renderer, you can go to base color and use this button here to load a texture. But uh, in the future, and not even in the future, in this video, when I will create something called a bump map, all my work will be done in the V-Ray material. So because I use V-Ray since 2008, and this is what I'm going to use. And in the future, when I start to talk about lighting and or you know rendering, I will be using V-Ray. So for now, the first step you can follow even if you are using those two materials. It's the same procedure. In the beginning, you just select the object, you select an empty material, and you know it's empty because it doesn't have a bracket on the corners, and you click assign material to selection. You can also click drag and drop it on the object. I will try it here. I can click, drag, and then release the mouse. I will assign this one again. Now, as you can see, it has a bracket that shows that it is used in the scene. Also, this bracket is opaque because the object is selected. If I click outside, now it's not selected. It still has the bracket, but they are transparent now. So that shows that this material is used in the scene, but the object is not selected. Now, as we said, a material is made of different elements. The first one is the texture. I need a texture. I will add a wood texture to this this object. Um, to do that, I need to click on this button. Here, this is the diffuse color. In some cases, you just need a solid color for your material. It depends. Like if, for example, if you are creating a plastic material, maybe it doesn't need a texture. You just need to change the color the way you like, and then you can add different properties. Like we said, a material is made of different properties, like the color of the body and a certain degree of reflection or and other stuff. But for now, I will create a wooden texture for this one. So first, if you don't have a library of textures, you can go on the internet. There are some websites that gives you free materials. For example, you have this site here, which is CJ Textures. You can type in here www.textures.com, which is the same as if you type here CJ Textures. It will take you to the same website. Here the textures are grouped in categories. If you click on wood, don't forget to create an account. It's free. Create a free account first. Let's say I want a fine wood. I have, as you can see here, I will go back. In fine wood, I have 82 textures, so I can click here and scroll down. I already downloaded this one. You can click it, and then you choose download. You have different resolutions. Now there are some resolutions reserved for premium accounts. I already downloaded this texture here. There is another website also, a good one, called www.3dxo.com. Here also there are many type of textures. I will click on this one. Here, for example, if you download, you will be downloading 3 different images. Here you see that it will, if you click download, you will have a zip file that contains the diffuse texture, which is the texture, that the color of the body, this one, a bump map, this one, and a specular map. We will see in this video how we can use a bump map. What is a bump map? How can we use it? How can we create our own in Photoshop if we like, and how it works. So also there is this one. It's called well, it's www.archivetextures.net. Also you have categories here. You can click on wood, let's say. Here you can click on the wood again to see all the wood textures, and you have 95 pages. They are all for wood textures. Like let's say this is the page 55. You see, you have many options. You can click on the one you like, and then you click again here, and then click download now. So let's go back to Max. Now to add a texture, the first element of our material, the first property, you click this button, and by the way, if you go down here, you have maps. It's the same as this button. All these shortcuts, you can see them here below. These small buttons are shortcut for those. So click on this button, then here in maps, general, double click bitmap, choose the texture, and now as you can see, you don't see it in the viewport, but if you render now, you will see it. But if you want to see it in the viewport, you have to click this button here, show shaded material in viewport. So, and now as you can see, this map shows up, but it has some problems. Now before that, here we are in the bitmap level. We have some controls to control the behavior of the texture. As you can see here, we are in the diffuse level bitmap. If I want to go to the material level, I click here, go to parent. Now this texture here has some problems. It's not mapped the way we like. Max added the texture the way well, Max decided how to map the texture. Now for us to adjust the mapping, we click the object, we go to the modify panel, modifier list, and look for UVW map modifier. Now as you can see, now I will click this arrow here, click Gizmo. I have this Gizmo here. So what this Gizmo does, this Gizmo, you can imagine it as like a projector. Before I go on, like I said, if you are using the standard material, just click this button, which is the same. It will take you to this thing here. Just double click bitmap. Or if you are using the standard surface for Arnold, just base color, click on this one. Okay, again here, imagine this rectangle like a projector, like if you are projecting a movie on the wall. So you can imagine uh, this texture here stretched on this rectangle. Now this rectangle has the dimensions of this object, and this is the default behavior when you add it to the object. Now we have two problems to deal with. First, if you do a close-up, you see that here I have like 1 pixel color stretched all along the this face, and this is because if you look on top, you can imagine the texture stretched here and projected downward. So here on the edge we have 1 pixel of the image. Here on the edge we have 1 pixel, and this pixel is projected downward, and you can see it here. So this polygon and this polygon inside, and this one here, they are having only their share of the texture is only 1 pixel. We need to be able to project this image from this side and from this side and from this side, I mean from 6 sides. This is the first problem. The second problem is that because by default this gizmo took the dimensions of this object, and the dimensions of the objects, the aspect ratio. What I mean by aspect ratio, the relation between the width and the height. See, when somebody mentions, when you hear the aspect ratio of an image, aspect ratio means you take the width of the image and you divide it by the height. So if the width, let's say the width is 1000 pixels and the height is let's say 500, we say we have an aspect ratio of 2. It's 1000 divided by 2. Of course it's not the case here, but just you know what I'm talking about. So what we need, so the first problem is that the texture is stretched, and even here it's projected correctly. We want it to be projected from top for this part, but it is stretched. We need this gizmo that holds the texture to respect the aspect ratio of this texture. So to solve that, here we have a tool called bitmap fit. So we click on it, then we point to the texture, we click, and just now look what happens to the gizmo when I click here. As you can see, what happens that the gizmo adjusts to respect the aspect ratio of this texture. Now it has the same aspect ratio. Now you might ask why it keeps repeating, because the gizmo is here, because by default the default behavior is that when this rectangle finishes, another one is added here, another infinitely, in the X direction and the Y direction. It's called tiling. I will go back to the material editor. I will go back to the diffuse level, the bitmap rollout. Now I'm in the bitmap rollout of the diffuse component. Look what happens. Okay, just here I have U tiling. The U tiling goes in the X direction. If I uncheck it, you see that there is no repetition on the X direction. So if I move the gizmo, but if I move the Y, it's still repeating because I have the V tiling on. So I uncheck it, and now I have one copy only of the texture projected. Now I can press the R for the scale and scale it from the inside. Remember, scale it from the inside because you don't want to mess up with the aspect ratio again. So scale it from the inside just to make it bigger or smaller. I will check the tiling again. So now I solved the first problem, which is the aspect ratio. There is no stretching. The second problem, I want this texture to be projected in all directions, in 6 directions. So I will go back here, and from mapping, I choose box mapping. And now you see the gizmo now takes the shape of a box. Now you can imagine on each side you have a copy of the texture, and this copy is projected. So now I have 6 projections. Now I can fix the scaling, the rotation, and the placement of the texture by using move. Let's say I want to scale this texture up. I can go to scale, and from the inside I can scale it up a little bit. I can move it up a little bit. Now, as you can see here, since the texture, when the texture ends, when this texture ends, another one will repeat. Sometimes you have this seam here. Maybe you don't like to see it. You can just scale it up, but remember that you should not exaggerate too much. You have to always think that this texture, maybe this photo represents, let's say, 40 by 40 centimeter in real life. So you don't want to stretch it in a way that it will look fake to the eye. Sometimes you can cheat a little bit. What matters is that when you look at it, you don't see it fake. You don't see these grains are overscaled. Sometimes you can get away with a little bit of cheating. In the end, you just have to use your eyes, and if it looks good to the eye, if it looks believable, then it's good. It's better than having it like scientifically correct but ugly. If you can cheat a little bit, not too much, and it looks good, that means that's good. Now, if I want this texture to not to run in this direction, if I can press rotate, I can click on angle snap, turn it on, so I can rotate in with the increment of 5 degrees. You can rotate it like this. Now 90 degrees. Now it is running in this direction. I will undo this. I prefer it like this. Also here in the edge, if you like to run it, to make it run this direction, you can just rotate it in 90 degrees this way. Now it's running like this. I will undo again. Also you can do this. Now it's running in this direction. I think I like it like this. Okay, now this is for the first element of our texture, which is uh, the first element of our material, which is the texture. Now, this texture has different another property, which is bumpiness. If I look carefully, you see that you have parts that are recessed and parts are a little bit elevated. To achieve this effect, I need to add a bump map. So I go to material editor again, go to parent, material level. Here I need to use a bump map. I'll click on this button, bitmap. Now I can choose the same map. I will double click this slot here. This is like a real-time rendering of the material. Go to parent again. I will go back here. By default, the bump has a 30% of bumpiness. Now, how this works, when you add a texture to this slot here, 3D Studio Max doesn't care about the colors of the texture that you added. It doesn't see it like this in color. It sees it. I have it open in Photoshop. I will add a black and white layer. Now, this is how Max sees the texture when you add it here. Textures that are added here under the diffuse. All of these textures that you add here, they are meant to have an effect on the look of the material. So the diffuse color, the diffuse texture is the one that represents the body, the color of the body. Now, all of these textures that you add here, they are meant not to show directly, but to have a certain effect. And 3D Studio Max, when you add textures here, 3D Studio Max ignores the color information and sees them as black and white. Max cares about the contrast of these textures, the brightness of the pixels inside to achieve certain effects. So as you can see here, if I make the bumpiness 0 and press enter, just look here what happens. Now it doesn't have any bumpiness. I will make it 70. And look what happens. Now how it works, I will zoom in here on the texture. Now, what Max cares about is the contrast between pixels. Let's say here, between this pixel and this pixel, here I have brighter pixels than these pixels here. Now, what you have to imagine this grayscale. You have to imagine this grayscale texture is applied on top of this texture. So it's like you have another version of this texture, another grayscale version of this texture on top of this one. So here, for example, between these pixels and these pixels here, these pixels are brighter than these pixels. So the part of the texture, the part of the textures that falls under these darker pixels, they look recessed. And these here, the part of the texture that fall below this part of the bump map, they look like they are more bumpy. They are more elevated. Now, if I increase the brightness of these pixels here, that means I'm increasing the difference in brightness between those two. I'm increasing the contrast. So these will look even more recessed and these will look more elevated. So here you have to think about brightness but also contrast between neighboring pixels. For example, if I made all of this bump map one color, there will be no bumpiness. Even if I make it white, there will be no bumpiness. So it's the amount of contrast between neighboring pixels. More contrasts mean some of them are much more brighter than others. The much more brighter will cause this elevated effect that you see here, and the darker will create this recess. A more dark, that means more recession. But like I said, it's uh, we have to think about the contrast. It's the contrast that matters between neighboring pixels. More contrast, that means more bumpiness. So I will close this one and let's do a small test render now. Because we don't have a lighting in the scene, well, we can still see some bumpiness, but in some places maybe we will not see it correctly, but you will get an idea about the effect. So I will zoom in. I will go to rendering and I will open the render setup. This is V-Ray rendering engine. So now if you have V-Ray rendering engine, you might get a black render if you just render now, because by default the GI is on. So you just turn it off and in V-Ray here just switch to bucket. I'm doing this because I don't have any lighting in the scene. So if this is on and there is no lighting in the scene, the default light of the viewport, the light that now enables me to see what I'm doing in the viewport, this default light will be turned off if this is on. So now I'm not going to add any lighting, so I want to use the default lighting to render my object. So I will click render now. As you can see here, you have certain degree of bumpiness also here. Now here, since I don't have a direct light hitting, there is a bumpiness, but you don't see it very well. Doesn't matter for now. I will open my material editor and I will make this one 0 and just render again, just to make you see the difference. Just look here what happens. It becomes flat again. I will make it 100. I will zoom in just a little bit more and render. As you can see, the bumpiness. And here also you have certain degree of bumpiness. As I said, if we had some lighting, this part here will look better. Now, a tip for the bump map. The bump map, it doesn't actually doesn't change the geometry, and it has a certain limitation. You cannot push this geometry in the rendering like 1 meter up or something. It is limited, and also it depends on the point of view. You need to look at the object at a certain angle and avoid this parallel type of view. Let's say here, if I'm looking in this parallel way, the bumpiness will look ugly. It will not actually look bumpy at all. Always avoid this parallel look. If I render again, I will have this bumpiness here, but as you can see here, it's blurry, it's bad. So just try as much as you can to look at a certain angle. You don't have to look perpendicularly to the object, just at a certain angle. It will look fine. I will try again. As you can see now, it looks better. Now it's a small resolution image. I will zoom in. We'll cancel the rendering. Okay, this is for the bump map. Now here maybe you saw this texture here. Sometimes the texture itself doesn't give you the bumpiness you like, so you like to have your own bump map. In many cases, when you download images, like like you saw here, when I told you about those three textures, if you see, this is the bump map. Now, if you look carefully, this is not just this with a grayscale look. As you can see here, you have more dark uh, um, seams. So you can, obviously, this texture was created in Photoshop, so based on this texture. And we can do the same here. For example, this one, I can increase the contrast between the pixel to achieve more pronounced bumpiness. If you like, also you can add another texture here, and let's say you can create a different type of bumpiness, or you can select part of this texture and remove the bumpiness from it, give it like one solid color, so there will be bumpiness here and no. You can do it. You can manipulate the bumpiness. But for now, let's say I'm not satisfied with the amount of contrast, and I want this bumpiness to be harder. So I can now, in addition to this black and white layer, I can click here and add a curve. Here I'm manipulating the bright pixels, making them more bright, and here I'm making the dark pixels darker. Now I can save as JPEG. I will override the one I created before, and now I can go to Material Editor, bump. I will click here and replace this one with this one. Okay, yeah. And now if I will double click here and check the real-time rendering. I'm gonna do some comparison. Now I have this one set to 100 with my new bump map. If I click it and I replace it again with the old one, just look here what happens. You see? Now I will choose this one and just look. The bumpiness changes. I will try again. This one. Okay, you got the idea. Now, one last thing. I'm gonna talk a little bit about quickly about different types of mapping. Let's say you have spherical shape. If I apply apply this texture to this cylinder, Now, because this cylinder is created by 3D Studio Max, Max by default applies a cylindrical type of mapping. It's like here, if it's like if I choose this cylindrical type. So I will go here and add a UVW map to it. Now it has this by default the planar projection from top down, so this one is mapped correctly, and here I'm getting only 1 pixel. Now if I choose cylindrical, as you can see, it's like before, if it's like it has the same effect like if there is no UVW map. So if I turn this UVW map off, you can turn the layers, the modifiers off and on. It's like the layers in Photoshop. Also, you can delete them if you like, but you can turn them off to just see the before and after. You can turn off their, you are turning off their effect like this. So as you can see, turn it on and off doesn't change anything. Now I can, because by default it's a cylinder, and Max applies a cylindrical type of mapping by default without the need of this. Now if I choose box, it has a box-like mapping, box style mapping. I will go back to cylindrical. Now you have this option for the cylindrical. Uh, before choosing this option, how this works, as you can see now, the Gizmo is a cylindrical. It's cylindrical. Max takes one version of the texture, only one copy, and wraps it around on this Gizmo. So you can imagine, like in here, the texture is like in here, for example, like I said, you have the texture on this Gizmo here. You have 6 versions of the texture, and they are projected. Here, in this case, the texture is wrapped on this yellow Gizmo and then projected on the cylinder. If you click cap, you will have another type of mapping, which is a planar. It's like this planar one. It's like this planar projection added on top, from top down. It's like you have another Gizmo going on top here and projecting one version of the texture perpendicularly. If you have a sphere and you also here, I forgot to just show you that you can, if you choose scale, you can scale the texture. Okay, and for this one, for the sphere, also because it is generated by Max by default without using any tool, it will have a spherical type of of mapping. It's like here, if it's like you are using the spherical style. So if I apply this here, you can see if I add a UVW map, by default it's planar, the usual. Then I can, if I choose spherical, you can see that if I turn it on and off, nothing changes. Okay, I will talk about only one type, one additional type of mapping, which is face. Here I can use this example or this example, doesn't matter. What face does, simply, it will project one version of the texture on each existing polygon. For example, this cylinder, if I go here, I will see that it has 18 division on this side. Like if I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 here, you know, I have 18, and I have 10 going up 10 height segments. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So in total, I have 10 by 18 polygons. I have 118 polygon. So if I choose in the UVW map, if I choose face, I will have 118 copy of this texture, of the whole texture, 118 version of this texture mapped on this object. So now at this moment I have only one texture wrapped around. But if I click and choose face, just look here what happens. See, this is the whole texture repeated 180 times. And as you can see, you cannot control the gizmo anymore. Like you cannot scale or you cannot do anything. Okay, so this is for the face mapping. In addition to that, what we should talk about, I think for now, it's enough. And in the next video, we will start to talk about lines, splines, 2D shapes. How can we manipulate them? Things like that. I hope you liked the video, and thank you for watching.